Hello and welcome to another episode of Metal Effort. My name's Nehemiah and today we're looking at this piece of metal, the Skaha 2. This is also on loan from Nick Shabazz. Thank you, Nick. You've been supplying a lot about my knives. This is a really highly sought after knife. So I'm excited to get my take on this knife and see if it's really worth all the hype. Give us an idea of time and space. Let's take a look at some size comparisons. We've got our Spyderco PM2 and our Pair 3. Oh, that Pair 2 doesn't want to get into the shot. There you go. Okay, so this is a perfectly medium size knife, which is good. I like medium sized knives when the time calls for it. So definitely larger than our Pair 3. So we'll get that out of the way. And let's get in some measurements here. Looks like it's just under 3.5 inches to the shoulder, about 3.25 on the cutting edge, maybe 3.2, I'll say. Next thing we'll do is the weigh-in, just over 3 ounces. So under an ounce an inch, which is desirable. And I like that. I like that size. That's a good size. With that out of the way, let's get into the dent, the decent, the excellent, the nitpicks, and the terrible of this piece of metal. First off, in the decent is the blade. We usually start with the blade, and this is kind of a special blade. So you've got some really interesting kind of machine grooves here. It kind of reminds me of what the Grismo brothers are doing on the Norsemans, where they've got some machining onto the blade. It's on both sides. And it gives it that unique, flair. It's shows that there was manual labor or machine labor put into this, a lot of time and effort to, do something with blade that's more than just, a bare, naked blade. So I appreciate this, although it kind of reminds me of like those zingers, like from Hostess. You know what I'm talking about? Like if I was like a metal eating monster, like the Cookie Monster, but for knives, I would eat this one first. We also have S35VN, which is solid knife that's, good enough to where, you don't feel justified if you wish it was nicer. So, the steel snob in me is really bored of S35VN as well as S30V, but I think that's more of a human condition of just getting bored with something that's good. So I got to fight that intuition. S35VN is a fine steel, and in the context of having a pocket knife, the difference between this and most steels is not going to be that much. There are exceptions. Something like LC200N is in certain situations going to upstage the steel pretty severely. But for most cases, it's not going to rust super easily, and it's going to hold an edge, and it should be easy to sharpen. So that's good. As far as like garbage on the blade, I kind of like what's here. I like what they've done. You got the made in BC, British Columbia. Pretty sure that's not the time it was made, but this is a classy way to do it. Mill it out instead of stamping your garbage on it with some ink, laser etch. Get out of here. This is classy. I like this on all three. I think that adds to it, doesn't detract from it at all. I want to know what kind of steel it is. I want to know who made it. This is a way to do it where I will not complain. So that means it gets to be in the decent section. There you go. Another thing I really like is this wire clip. Wire clip is done really well. It could have been a little higher, just a little bit, but you can see kind of why they have these steel kind of bar that's attached to the liner lock, and they want to incorporate that into the clip. And so that didn't move back as far as maybe I would have liked. But I think they could have re-engineered that a little bit and made the clip just a little bit higher. Just a little bit. Definitely a lot better than, the egregious, things that Spyderco's doing where it would start down here, then be the spoon clip. And, why? Let's just put our clips here, guys. Let's just put it right in the middle of the freaking knife, huh? Let's do that. No, do this. At the very least, this is fine. A little bit's poking out, a little bit. So it's not my excellent, but still, I appreciate the effort. Next thing I want to talk about is the ergonomics, and this is a very contoured G10 handle. So I like how rounded it is. It's fairly big, And so it fills the hand really, really, really well. Very, very, very comfortable. That wired clip, doesn't have any sharp edges on it, obviously. So no hot spots off of that. And it's got a palm swell, both vertically and horizontally. And you could just tell the difference when you have a palm swell. It feels almost like I'm holding a Bark River fixed blade in my hand. Like if I was to close my eyes, oh yeah, this feels like a Bark River. I'm closing my eyes right now if you didn't know. And so, yeah, I mean, this is comfortable enough to where I could have put it in the excellent, but I'm gonna leave it in the decent. I really like the jimping. The jimping is actually very aggressive on both the top of the blade as well as the jimping on the flipper tab. Flipper tab jimping is probably the sharpest I've personally come across. Any sharper, and it would be in the nitpick of being too sharp. But I'll definitely take some, flipper tab that has a little too much grab than not enough. And it does definitely help the knife. In the action, you're not going to fall off very easily. So jimping on both the places that have jimping are done well. I really like this sharpening choil. This is a nice, big, deep, open sharpening choil. So I foresee any future sharpenings on this blade should be pretty much a breeze. The blade shape is easy to sharpen on. And then a very generous sharpening choil. It's definitely not a finger choil, but it's not that far away from your hand, so it doesn't feel too disengaged. You have control. This is really good for a knife that doesn't have a finger choil. I like finger choils, but it's not like make it or break it. I think both kind of design philosophies have their merit, and having a nice, good sharpening choil but still be pretty close to the blade and have good control of the knife is legitimate strategy. So, good job. Another thing I really like is where the lanyard hole is. This is kind of off to the side, out of the way. Now, like I said, I kind of wish the clip was a little bit higher, but it's not too bad. If you put it here, I feel like it would be in the blade path. So, this part of the knife makes sense. And so I think it's fine, and something is I don't want to say like casual. Casual isn't the right word, but this practical kind of whimsical design that they've got going on of like, I don't know, like a search and rescue knife or something. It's bright. It's very simplistic. It kind of reminds me of like a toy knife in some way. And so having a lanyard hole on that kind of knife, I think makes more sense. Kind of a backpack knife or something. I don't know why I'm thinking along those lines. But as far as that goes, I think it's fine. And that's a good place for it. Now let's talk about the excellent. And this is going to be dominated by my trifecta of good action. You have open, you have disengage, and you have close. So let's talk about the open. Open is super fantastic. The detent on this is pretty strong. Not like uncomfortably strong, but strong. And so, factoring that in with the really grippy flipper tab, and you get really authoritative deployment every single time. And there's definitely an acoustic element to it that is very satisfying. So open is great. There's only one way to open the knife. There's no thumbs or holes or anything else, so it's flipper or bust. But it's really good. It's really fast, strong. Blade is super solid, and action is really good. So now let's talk about the disengage. You've got your knife open, and your fidget nut. Nice, big, generous finger cutout here. So that helps with the ergonomics of holding the knife, but it also gives me a way for my thumb to get in there horizontally without having to jab my finger in some way, and then just move it over to the side. So it's leverage is being used here, and it's perfect. It's perfect. Super easy to disengage that. No lock stick. Very quick and easy to get in there. Very comfortable. This is, something that a lot of knives, very expensive knives, don't do well. I need to be able to get into that lock bar or that liner lock. If I want to use the knife, opening the knife, I gotta close it too. Equal number of times. So, good job. Now, I've disengaged it. What about the action? Here your mileage may vary. When I first got the knife, it was super duper fall shutty, and then I noticed that there's a little bit of blade play and it was a little off center. So put some Loctite on there, not too much nick, and it was the blue type, and tightened it up a little bit, and it perfectly solved the problem. So it's 100% on point, dead center, and then action. It's no blade play, but it's definitely 1.25 jostles. If you do a little bit more vigorously, then you can do 1. And this is, pretty tight for how much, I tightened the screw and how solid the lockup is and the blade. I would say that's very good to have action that drop shutty, considering, how much I tightened it down. So that's good. So all 3 things get a passing grade, and that's why it's in my excellent: the open, the disengage, and the close. Now let's talk about the nitpicks. And this is like the nittiest nitpick of all nitpicks. This knife looks cheap. And, to a knife nut who knows how hard it is to find one of these, you might have kind of reworked in your mind how you perceive this knife. But I'll tell you, I've handed this knife to probably 5 people, at least, that are not knife people. That I often will, hand them a knife and we're like, how much do you think this is? And they poke around, open it, close it. And, they're usually way off. But this knife, they were underestimating. They would say $10 to $50 was probably the average response that I got. And I get it. I understand why. They think this is plastic. It's G10. G10 isn't particularly expensive. But it's, solid blue. You could get different colors, but, just the simplicity of it, the lightweightness of it, that a lot of us still associate, heft to quality, even though we're, actively looking for the opposite in knives up to a point. And so, they look at it, they see, oh, it's a wire clip. I could see all the screws. It's this bright, cartoony Smurf blue. It's looking at the blade, a knife nut is instantly going to know, oh, wow, this, it's probably some CNC work or something on the blade. This is a sign of quality, right? Without even handling the knife. But to a non-knife person, this means nothing. It's kind of cartoony art. Looks a little goofy, Comic Sans Pro, type of. So, does that matter? Absolutely not. It doesn't matter to anybody. You can buy this knife and, the fact that it works as well as it does and has the action as well as good as it does, the fact that it looks like $10, maybe people won't steal it. Maybe people won't take it. Also, it could mean that if somebody asks to borrow your knife, they might not be as careful with this knife as they would a knife that looked as expensive as it was, because they might think this might be one of your throwaway knives. So you got to be careful with that. Most of us have learned not to just blindly hand a friend a knife, a non-knife person a knife to use, because their mind and our mind do not think the same way about how a knife should be used. So just something to point out. You've got the Zinger blade. You've got the Smurfette plastic handle. It doesn't look as much as it costs. Take it with a grain of salt. Not a big deal. Next thing is just availability. These things are really hard to come by. I think they keep adding people to their book, and they're over a year, maybe even a year and a half on the books. There's rumors of them making some carbon fiber ones, which would be really awesome. I think carbon fiber would really class up this knife really, really well. But, that's probably years off as far as my history or future with this knife. It's just really hard to find them. They come up on the secondary market sometimes. They usually go for about $200 to $210 for the G10 ones. Can't imagine how much the CF ones will go for if somebody ever decides to sell one. It's not like a huge deal. A lot of the knives that I show are hard to get, but for something that would otherwise look like just a normal production knife, they're hard to get. You have similar companies like TRM is kind of in the same boat, where they're just making really good knives that have good steels, good build quality, good fit and finish, good design, for, a reasonable price, $150 to $200. And so they're not a huge factor. They can't crank them out, and so it's going to be hard to find one. Another nitpick is just the blade to body ratio. Now, I just reviewed the Brower not too long ago, and this is a lot more egregious. You have, if you're factoring in the finger choil, you got 4.5-ish, just under, of non-blade, mass in the knife, and only like less than 2.5 inches of cutting edge. So this is much more egregious than that. But for some reason, because the finger choil is a part of the blade, it doesn't look that offset. I've got 3-ish inches here and 4-ish inches here, but here, for some reason, 3.5-ish inches and then 4.5 inches. But so you got the palm swell. It's so thick that when you're holding it, it kind of feels like the blade's a little small. It's kind of a weird like optical illusion, or I don't know what's going on. But if I was to cover this and you're like, look at this big palm swell knife, and then I reveal the blade and it's just like kind of small. It's just a little blade, When we close it and we look, it goes pretty far to the back, so it's not as bad as maybe the optical illusion would lead us to believe. And, the fact that this is pretty thin blade slack and the handles are very thick and contoured, I think that's part of what's contributing to like the mismatch in my brain as far as how big the handle and the blade is. These aren't necessarily bad things. It's just something I'll point out. It makes it look a little bit underpowered. It's like having a Hummer with a 4-cylinder. Maybe that 4-cylinder is a hybrid and it actually has a ton of horsepower. You just have to get over that initial, you got a Hummer with a 4-cylinder? So, I don't know, silly. This is less about the knife. This is more about psychology. I just realized. It is what it is. We're humans, we're monkeys, we're primates. We got to get over these mental barriers. As far as the terrible goes, I've got nothing terrible to say. This is a very popular knife for good reason. It's practical, it's unique, it's good action, good price, good value. Kind of transitioning that into the conclusion. If you can get this knife, yeah, definitely I recommend this knife. This is a great knife. If you can get one of the carbon fiber models coming out for a reasonable price, don't overpay too much, I think it's worth it. I think I'd be really interested in that and kind of patch up the issue I'd have with the Smurfness of the, Smurf half Smurf, half Zinger kind of thing that's going on. I think carbon fiber would make it lighter, a little bit more classy, and not look so goofy. So that would kind of patch up my very minor nitpicks with the knife. I like this knife a lot, and I think if you get one, you'll like it a lot too. That's all I have for you on this knife. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time.